The invitation. I met her on a random chat app, the kind people scroll through when boredom sinks deep into the bones. She was different, at least she seemed to be. Her name was Emily, and there was something captivating about her. She spoke with a strange mix of warmth and distance, as if she was from another time, another world. Our conversations flowed from idle chit-chat to deeper things, darker things. She told me she loved the mysterious, the abandoned. That's when she suggested we meet. I should have been more cautious. There were too many red flags in retrospect, but when you've spent as much time alone as I had, you tend to ignore them. Emily had this way of pulling me in, like a spider wrapping its web around its prey, slow and deliberate. Her laugh would echo in my mind long after our calls ended, and her voice, soft yet commanding, kept replaying in my head. The plan was set. We'd meet at a place she chose. I expected a coffee shop or a park. But no. Emily wanted to meet at an old, crumbling house on the outskirts of town. A place no one talked about, a place hidden from the world. She told me it used to be a grand estate, but now it was just a shell of its former self. "You'll love it," she said, her voice oozing with excitement. "It's got character." When I looked up the address, something about it felt off. The house didn't show up on maps, at least not anymore. It was as if it had been erased from memory. But Emily seemed so eager, so certain this would be the perfect place for us to finally meet. And so, against my better judgment, I agreed. The drive to the abandoned house was longer than I anticipated. The further I drove, the more desolate the surroundings became. The road narrowed, twisting and turning like it was trying to throw me off. Trees loomed on either side, their branches like skeletal arms reaching out. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, an unsettling feeling crept in. There were no other cars, no signs of life. Just me, alone on this forgotten road. The GPS lost signal miles back, leaving me to rely on my gut. As I neared the location Emily had given me, the house finally came into view, half hidden behind a row of overgrown trees. It stood there, hulking and decrepit, a monument to decay. The windows were shattered, gaping holes where eyes should have been. The roof sagged as if the weight of time was too much to bear. Vines crawled up its sides, twisting around the bricks like they were trying to choke the life out of it. The air felt colder here, the kind of cold that sinks deep into your bones, making you feel unwelcome. I pulled up to the front, the gravel crunching beneath my tires. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than they should have, my pulse quickening. There was no sign of Emily, no sign of anyone. I stepped out of the car, the eerie silence swallowing me whole. The only sound was the distant whisper of the wind, brushing against the dilapidated walls. I should have turned back. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, but something stronger kept me rooted in place. Curiosity, fear, and something else I couldn't quite name. Standing in front of the house, I realized there was no going back. I stood there, staring at the house, feeling a gnawing unease in my stomach. The kind of unease that crawls under your skin, prickling with every whisper of wind. But I had come this far, hadn't I? Backing out now would seem cowardly, and maybe, just maybe, there was some charm in this crumbling place that Emily saw. Maybe I was overreacting. With a deep breath, I took my first step toward the house, gravel crunching underfoot, the only sound in the oppressive silence. The closer I got, the more ominous it felt, as if the house itself was alive, waiting, watching me approach with unseen eyes. My heart pounded in my chest, louder than it should have been, like a war drum signaling something terrible ahead. The front door was hanging off its hinges, its wood rotting, blackened with age. Vines snaked through the cracks, and the metal doorknob was cold to the touch, despite the sticky warmth of the late evening. I stood there for a moment, frozen, staring at the gaping maw of the entrance. It was as though the house wanted to swallow me whole. But I wasn't going to back down. Not now. I pushed the door open, and it creaked, the sound long and drawn out, almost like a groan. The interior was worse than I expected. The floor was littered with debris, broken furniture, splintered wood, pieces of shattered glass. The air was thick with the scent of mildew and decay, like the house had been abandoned far longer than I had imagined. Every step I took echoed through the empty space, each footfall heavy, deliberate. Dust swirled in the air, catching in the fading light from the cracked windows. The wallpaper, once vibrant and patterned, now hung in strips, curling at the edges like dead skin peeling away. My eyes swept across the room, taking in the eerie stillness. Old portraits hung crooked on the walls, their subjects' faces blurred by time, their eyes seeming to follow me as I moved deeper into the house. I paused, noticing something strange in the center of the room, a grand, rotting staircase leading to the upper floors. The banister was broken, pieces of it scattered across the floor like jagged teeth. For a moment, I just stood there, staring up at the darkness beyond the stairs, wondering if Emily was somewhere up there waiting for me. The silence pressed down on me, growing heavier with each second. My throat felt tight, my mouth dry, but I couldn't turn back now. Not after everything. With another deep breath, I called out, my voice sounding small, swallowed by the vast emptiness. "Emily?" No answer. I took another step forward, the floor creaking loudly beneath me. And then I heard it, a sound, faint at first but unmistakable. Footsteps. Slow and deliberate, coming from somewhere upstairs. My blood turned cold, every hair on the back of my neck standing up. "Emily, is that you?" I called again, trying to sound more confident than I felt. Still no response. The footsteps stopped, but the tension in the air thickened. My heart raced, my pulse pounding in my ears as I stared up the staircase. Something was there. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it. That sense of being watched, of being hunted. My mind raced, filling in the blanks with images of things I didn't want to imagine. Things that could be lurking in the shadows, waiting for me to make a mistake. And then something moved. A flash of black, quick and darting at the edge of my vision. I spun around, my breath catching in my throat. The front door slammed shut behind me, the sound like a gunshot in the silence. I froze, my eyes locked on the door, now sealed, trapping me inside. Panic rose in my chest, but I forced it down. It's just the wind, I told myself. Or maybe Emily playing some kind of prank. She loved the mysterious after all. Maybe this was all part of the game. I clenched my fists, steadying my breath, and took another step forward. But then I heard it, a low guttural growl. It wasn't human. It sounded too primal, too hungry. The sound reverberated through the house, vibrating in my bones. My legs went stiff, my instincts screaming at me to run, but my body refused to move. The growl grew louder, closer. Something was coming. Something was moving through the house, through the walls. It seemed, the sound growing louder and more insistent with every second. My mind raced, trying to rationalize it, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination, but I knew something was there. I whipped around, eyes scanning the room, the shadows warping and shifting. And then I saw it. A hulking figure burst from the darkened corner of the room. It wasn't human, not even close. Its skin was slick and gray like rotting flesh. Its eyes gleamed with a sickening hunger, its mouth gaping wide, filled with jagged teeth. It moved unnaturally, its limbs long and twisted, joints bending in ways they shouldn't. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. It charged toward me, its growl morphing into a horrific scream, the sound filling the house, rattling the windows. Time slowed as it lunged for me, its claws outstretched, ready to tear me apart. But then, just as it was inches away from my face, everything stopped. The creature froze and then, it laughed. The deep, rumbling growl turned into something more, something mocking. And suddenly, the figure reached up and pulled something from its face. A mask. My heart pounded as the mask fell to the floor with a hollow thud, revealing Emily's face beneath it. Her eyes sparkled with amusement, her mouth twisted into a wide grin. She threw her head back and laughed, a sound that echoed off the walls, reverberating in my skull. "Got you," she cried, her voice dripping with mirth. "You should have seen your face." My chest heaved, my mind struggling to process what had just happened. The adrenaline still surged through my veins, but now it felt hollow, confused. I stood there, trembling, as she casually tossed the grotesque mask onto a nearby chair. "You looked like you were about to piss yourself," Emily said, wiping a tear from the corner of her eye. She took a step closer, her smile never faltering. "You really thought I'd drag you out here just to meet in a normal place? Come on, where's the fun in that?" I couldn't speak. My throat was dry, my heart still hammering in my chest. She looked at me for a moment, her grin softening, and for a brief second, there was something else in her eyes. Something darker, something I couldn't quite place. But then it was gone, replaced with her playful smirk. "You should really learn to lighten up," she teased, giving me a playful shove. "This is just the beginning." Emily's words hung in the air, heavy and unsettling. "This is just the beginning." She had said it so casually, as though it was part of the joke, but it struck me like a hammer to the chest. I wanted to laugh it off, to play along like it was all just harmless fun, but there was something in her voice, something sinister. Still, I couldn't show fear. Not after everything. I forced a grin, even though my mind was screaming at me to run. "You really went all out, huh?" I said, my voice more controlled than I felt. "Nice touch with the mask." Emily's smile widened, but her eyes, there was something in them that made my skin crawl. A glint, like she was enjoying this more than she should. I shifted uncomfortably, glancing around the decrepit room to avoid her gaze. "Yeah," she replied, her tone dripping with amusement. "But like I said, this is just the beginning." My stomach tightened again. The words echoed in my head, refusing to leave. I glanced at the grotesque mask she had discarded, lying lifeless on the chair like a skin that had been shed. The house, with all its creeping shadows and decayed walls, seemed to be watching me, waiting for something worse. But I couldn't let her see me break. If she was playing some twisted game, then I needed to play along, at least for now. We wandered through the house, her leading the way as if she had been here 100 times before. The wooden floorboards groaned under our feet, the sound sending shivers up my spine. Emily seemed at ease, practically skipping ahead, her boots kicking up dust with each step. Every now and then she'd glance back at me, a mischievous grin plastered on her face. "Creepy, isn't it?" she asked, her voice echoing in the large empty space. I nodded, trying to focus on anything but the lingering feeling of dread building inside me. "Yeah, definitely got the haunted house vibe down." She laughed, a sound that seemed too bright for a place like this. "You could say that." We walked in silence for a while, making our way through rooms that looked like they hadn't been touched in decades. Each one was worse than the last, dust-covered furniture, rotting curtains hanging by threads, and that smell, damp, moldy, like the house was rotting from the inside out. But it wasn't just the house that unnerved me. It was her. The way she moved, the way she looked at me when she thought I wasn't paying attention. There was a darkness to her, something lurking just beneath the surface. And that phrase kept repeating in my mind. This is just the beginning. Finally, we stopped in what appeared to be an old dining room. A massive table sat in the center, its surface warped and cracked, chairs scattered haphazardly around it. Emily leaned against the table, her eyes glinting in the fading light that filtered through the dirty windows. "You look tense," she said, tilting her head in that playful, almost mocking way. I forced a chuckle, though it sounded hollow even to me. "Just trying to figure out where you're going with all this." She shrugged. "Maybe I just wanted to have some fun. You know, liven things up." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, that primal instinct telling me something wasn't right. But I forced myself to relax. I didn't want her to think I was scared, even though every fiber of my being was telling me to get the hell out of there. Emily took a step closer, her grin widening. She reached into her jacket, and for a brief second I thought she was going to pull out another prop, another part of her sick game. But instead she pulled out a small vial. "Here," she said, holding it up for me to see. "A little something to help you relax." I stared at it, my heart rate spiking. "What is that?" "Oh, come on," she said, rolling her eyes. "It's nothing dangerous. Just something to take the edge off." I shook my head, stepping back slightly. "I'm good, thanks." Before I could react, she moved faster than I expected, her hand shooting out. I felt a sharp prick in my arm, something cold spreading through my veins. My head spun, the world tilting around me as my vision blurred. I stumbled, my legs giving out beneath me, and I hit the floor hard. "Wow, what did you?" I slurred, my tongue heavy in my mouth. Emily knelt beside me, her face inches from mine, her grin stretching wider than before. "Don't worry," she whispered, her voice soft and full of malice. "It's all part of the fun." The last thing I saw before the darkness swallowed me was her face, hovering above me like a phantom, her eyes gleaming with cruel delight. When I woke, the world was damp and cold. My body felt heavy, like I was submerged in water. I blinked, trying to clear my vision, but everything was dark. I could hear water dripping somewhere, the steady plink echoing in the confined space. My skin prickled with cold, and the air was thick with moisture. I tried to move, but my limbs were sluggish, weighed down by the lingering effects of whatever Emily had injected me with. Slowly, painfully, I pushed myself up, my hands meeting cold stone beneath me. I was in a basement, a dark, cramped basement that reeked of mold and decay. I wasn't alone. As my vision adjusted, I saw them. Other boys scattered around the room, their eyes wide with fear and confusion. Some were chained to the walls, their clothes filthy, their faces pale and gaunt. They looked at me with hollow eyes as if they'd given up hope long ago. "What the hell?" I muttered, my voice hoarse. One of the boys, a lanky kid no older than 16, shuffled forward on his knees. His face was bruised, his lips cracked and bleeding. He looked at me, his expression vacant. "She brought you here too," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Just like the others." My heart pounded in my chest. "Oh, Emily?" The boy nodded, glancing nervously toward the stairs at the far end of the room. "She brings boys here, for fun. But when she gets bored," he trailed off, his voice trembling. I swallowed hard, dread settling deep in my stomach. "What does she do when she gets bored?" Before he could answer, the door at the top of the stairs creaked open. Light spilled into the room, and I could see the shadow of someone standing there. My heart leaped into my throat, every muscle in my body tensing. Emily's silhouette appeared, her figure framed by the dim light from above. But something was different. The playful grin, the teasing spark in her eyes, it was gone. Her expression was cold, detached, as though she had shed the mask of the girl I had met and revealed something much darker underneath. She stared down at us, her eyes scanning the room, and for a brief moment, her gaze landed on me. But then just as quickly she looked away, uninterested. "You were fun for a while," she said, her voice echoing through the basement. "But I get bored easily." Panic surged through me. I tried to speak, to plead, but my mouth felt dry, my voice caught in my throat. The other boys cowered in the corners, their eyes wide with terror, but Emily didn't care. She turned, her footsteps soft against the floor as she disappeared back up the stairs. The door slammed shut, leaving us in darkness once more. My mind raced, desperately searching for a way out, but the walls felt like they were closing in on me. Time seemed to stretch, warping as the hours passed in suffocating silence. Then, everything went dark. The next day, the town was buzzing with whispers. Another boy had gone missing. The old house on the outskirts was empty, as it always had been, a relic of a forgotten time. But something lingered in the air, a sense of dread that clung to the streets like a fog. And the boy? No one ever saw him again.